Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. On behalf of BIS Research, I would like to welcome you all to our webinar, Going Carbon Negative. This is Neha Singh, Research Analyst in Advanced Materials and Chemicals at BIS Research, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. BIS Research is a leading global market intelligence, research, and advisory company that focuses on emerging trends in technology which are likely to disrupt the dynamics of the market. The mission is to harness the potential of the disruptive technologies to make the business thrive in today's digital age. For today's webinar, we have an esteemed list of speakers. Firstly, we have Mr. Excel Gangor. Excel is the head of partnerships at Carbonex, which empowers companies to neutralize their residual emission by de-risking the procurement of high quality and permanent carbon removal credits to ultimately help accelerate permanent carbon dioxide removal activity around the globe. Carbonex recently announced its pre-seed funding round of nearly €1 million in October 2022. The company is right now based in Paris, France. Next, we have Mr. Nicolas Volgamot. During more than 15 years of career in climate change mitigation, Nicholas has gathered in-depth know-how on emission reduction certificates. As early as 2017, Nicholas started considering biochar and other carbon sink as one of the major solutions for our climate crisis. With his long-term experience, he is now supporting Carbon Future in successfully navigating itself through the jungle of standards and methodologies surrounding carbon dioxide certificates. Next, we have Ms. Pooja Manek. She is a lead analyst for advanced materials, chemicals, and sustainability practice at BIS Research. She is responsible for researching, analyzing, interpreting, and presenting market developments and technologies in the domain. Pooja also drives organizational initiatives, develops subject matter expertise, and enhances people skills. Prior to joining BIS Research, Pooja has rich experience of more than 6 years with research and advisory organizations such as Frost and Surveillance and Aranka. Also, we have with us Mr. Aryan Akshay. Aryan worked as a senior research analyst in advanced materials and chemicals domain with BIS Research. With an experience of more than 4 years in market intelligence, Aryan has worked on various projects related to specialty chemicals, bulk chemicals, packaging, sustainable chemical, and decarbonization. I thank all the panelists for their gracious presence. So let's discuss the agenda for today. We will start by highlighting the need of carbon dioxide removal technologies and factors driving the carbon dioxide removal market, followed by trends and opportunities of the carbon dioxide removal market. In the next 40 minutes, we are all keen to know from experience about carbon dioxide removal, and towards the end of the discussion, I will open the panel to the audience for the questions. I would like to request everyone in the audience to kindly mute their phones during the webinar and type in the question towards the end of the webinar. Any question that we are not able to answer today shall be reverted on the blog post or through email to you. Now let me open the panel for discussion and invite thoughts for discussion from Mr. Aryan Akshay. Over to you, Aryan.
Thank you so much, Neha, for such a thoughtful introduction. I would like to warmly welcome all the audience members and our esteemed speakers. Thank you all for your valuable presence. So let's talk about carbon dioxide removal. Since the beginning of Industrial Revolution, the world has continuously seen a rise in average global temperature. But as you can see here, there has been a significant increase in the last 2 decades. The primary reason behind this is the growing concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. As you can see in the second chart, the rise in temperature and increase in CO2 concentration are following the same growth pattern during the set time. Human activities, mainly the burning of fossil fuel, has brought the surge in the CO2 concentration. For the most part of our history, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere remained around 300 to 330 parts per million. But in the last decade or so, it has gone beyond 400 parts per million, which has been the cause of concern. So in order to keep a check on the global temperature, it is of the utmost importance that we adopt methods or technologies that can help achieve what we today call as the net zero target. Next, please. So what exactly are the countries around the world doing to reduce or contain the rising of global temperatures? To achieve this decarbonization goal and with the help of Paris climate agreements, various stringent emission targets are set by several regions and countries, as you can see here. The US has target of 50% to 52% reduction of greenhouse gas levels from the 2005 levels. In European Union, the target has been set at 55% emission cut below the levels of 1990. And many others, as you can check on the slide, have set some aggressive target to reduce their carbon emissions. Also, in order to track down the progress of each country and region, what is going on, the World Economic Forum and MIT Technology Review have published the Green Future Index country ranking in 2022. In this, 76 countries are ranked as per their initiatives, and these countries are divided into four parts as green leaders, green middle, climate laggards, and climate abstainers. Countries that comes under green leaders and green middles are the ones that are basically today driving the push towards decarbonization. And the countries in the other two sections still needs to make some stringent laws and stringent processes in order to achieve those decarbonization targets. Next slide, Neha. So what can be done to achieve those aggressive targets? Currently, there are various approaches that are active towards achieving decarbonization goals. But CDR and CCUS have been identified as one of the most credible ways to reduce carbon levels from the atmosphere. Both these approaches are somewhat similar, but also different in many ways. CCUS, or carbon capture, utilization, and storage, is a technology that captures carbon from a point source before it can be released in the atmosphere. On the other hand, CDR, or carbon dioxide removal, are the set of methods or technologies that are applied to remove excess carbon directly from the atmosphere. Technology in the CDR includes direct air captures, carbon mineralization, biochar, and ocean alkalinity. In the current scenario, when we talk about the current scenario of this technology, CCUS has more adoption rate than CDR. This is mainly because its technologies have been proven, deployed for quite some time. On the other hand, when it comes to CDR, there are various questions and many obstacles that are surrounding this current technology. Some of the questions which basically are asked by the industry experts are how easily can we develop it and how the technologies are effective, ethical, and scalable means to address climate change. So that is something still needs to be answered so that CDR can overcome CCUS in the long run. Next slide, please. So when it comes to CDR, what exactly is happening in its ecosystem? BIS has recently published a study tracking how the CDR market is expected to develop in the next 10 years. Although the market currently is small, but is expected to have a significant growth in the coming years. This is mainly because factors such as development of favorable policies across the world by the governments. For instance, in US, the government introduced Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021. Under this scheme, the government will be providing huge amounts of funds to develop a direct air capture hubs in the country, which will certainly give a boost to the adoption of CDR technologies. And not just in US, in Europe also, the introduction of CDR Launchpad is expected to boost the development of CDR technologies in the entire region because under this scheme, it promotes the collaboration of government and private players, which will further increase the amount of investments and the sharing of technical know-how. So as CDR industry is a growing market, it is also offering various opportunities for developing new kinds of products. For instance, some companies, what are they doing? They are using the carbon removed, which are removed using various technologies and storing it into concrete and developing a carbon neutral concrete. And then this concrete are used to develop a sustainable construction ecosystem. So all those things are currently connected in order to develop a sustainable future. So as the market is offering ample opportunities, you can also see in this market that there are various startups that are coming into this market space. And we have seen like such as Chubb Industrial, Oregon, Heimdall, Carbofex, and Cella. All these startups are offering their own type of technologies. Next slide, please, Neha. So talking about these companies a little bit more, we have seen that there are various players in the market, and every player has quite diverse in the sense that all these companies are offering every technology that is available for CDR ecosystem. However, what we have seen in recent years, majority of the market development has been done by Climeworks and Carbon Engineering. Whether it is collaboration or expansion, these two companies have led the way in recent years. So what does it suggest? So what we believe that this increasing amount of development towards direct air capture, it's believed to have that this technology of removing carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere has been identified as one of the most efficient ways of implementing carbon removal technologies. And it is also expected that investments and developments in order to spread the adoption of DAC is expected to continue, as also mentioned earlier by the introduction of Infrastructure Investment Act by US. They're also investing in DAC. So DAC is expected to continue in the coming years. And once these type of technologies are coming and more investments are being done, CDR adoption and its importance is expected to grow. So the future of CDR looks bright, and there has been aggressive steps that are being taken across the world. And once people understand the importance of CDR, this market will have a very booming future. So now, without taking much of your time, I would like to invite Mr. Axel for the presenting his thoughts on carbon dioxide removal trends and development. Over to you, Mr. Axel.
Thanks, Aryan. I appreciate it. I'm trying to turn my camera on. Oh, there we go. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so first, thank you all for joining today, and thank you to the BIS Research team for putting this together and for inviting me to be on this webinar today. I think these types of webinars and discussions are quite crucial to just help shed more light on the different technologies, on the approaches, I think your graphic about the difference between CCS, CCU, CDR, those are very important points to make because there's some important implications behind those technologies and those activities. And ultimately, we're here to kind of discuss what needs to be done in order to accelerate some of these solutions. So thank you for putting this together. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just a quick personal introduction. My name is Axel Gunger. I oversee partnerships here at CarbonX. Partnerships for us really mean a variety of things. It's kind of a broad term, actually, but at a sort of maybe somewhat obvious level, they include collaborations with like carbon accounting platforms or software, for example, engagements and relationships with sustainability consulting firms, as well as other what I'll call sort of one-off projects with business alliances or associations, where you have many different companies that have sort of come together for a common cause. And really the exercise is thinking about how our work to structure mutually beneficial relationships. And again, all with the same goal in mind, which is accelerating and helping advance permanent CDR activity and technologies. So that's kind of my role in a nutshell at a high level. And if we could go to the next slide, I'll give you a bit more context into what we do at CarbonX specifically. So I know it was mentioned before, but what we actually do is really just help companies on the demand side. So companies that are interested in buying carbon credits against their emissions and as part of their climate strategies, really helping them de-risk the procurement of those carbon credits that come from a variety of different permanent CDR projects. It's important to note that we only work with permanent removal pathways, which are labeled here on this slide. So there's kind of four main ones that and by the way, the terms that you see on here, there's sort of, some of them are terms that are used kind of ecosystem-wide, and some of them we've kind of, come up with to kind of organize ourselves internally. But really the four pathways are what we call DAC, so direct air capture that was mentioned earlier. What we like to call bio-based. So this will include some sub-removal pathways such as biochar, bio-oil, BECCS, synthetic biology, things like that. So that's kind of a parent category for those. Enhanced weathering being the third, and then finally ocean alkalinity enhancement being a fourth. Today, we cover and basically track, I think as of this morning, I looked at this number, 106 projects across these four pathways. Some of them, of course, are more populated than others, given, again, a point that was made earlier that some of these technologies are further along. So that's a little bit about what we do at CarbonX, right? We're trying to bridge the demand and the supply sides. And I would say that we mostly focus on the demand side because we just see that that's kind of a tough sort of nut to crack today to get these companies thinking about CDR, permanent CDR, and putting budgets forth to procure and purchase some of these credits. Next slide, please. In addition to the partnership kind of tasks or umbrella that I mentioned earlier, There are two initiatives that I'm a part of. One is actually a buyer coalition that we're working on, and we'll have more announcements on that pretty soon. But the second is regarding this slide that you're seeing here, which is a data initiative that I've been overseeing here at CarbonX. So, as CarbonX, because we sit in the middle at the intersection of these different ecosystems, so supplier, buyer, energy partners, regulation, which I'll touch on a bit later, and policy, we're really in a position to aggregate different data sets and metrics that we then think is quite interesting to aggregate and publish for the ecosystem. And we just think that this could be quite valuable and helpful to the interested parties and stakeholders and researchers, right? We also just think it's a healthy approach to have this information out there. If you kind of think about any established market, there's loads of data about those markets, and sort of, they're pretty easy to find. We think that for the CDR ecosystem to be a healthy, growing, established market, that this data transparency is quite key. And so through this initiative, as well as kind of the core business model that I mentioned earlier, we're definitely seeing some interesting market trends and developments. And so today I'd love to highlight some of those, and hopefully it's helpful for the audience. If we could move to the next slide, please. And perhaps the next one after this one. Yep, thank you very much. So within kind of market developments, the way I thought about speaking about this today is really kind of three main categories. So starting with supply, and then we'll get to demand, and then regulation. So starting with supply, lots of activity here, of course, as it was mentioned earlier, lots of different projects. I mentioned 106 projects that we're tracking across the different removal pathways. And so I think it's helpful to, we talk about all of this activity. I think it's helpful to take a step back just to kind of zoom out for a second and think about the size of what's happening. So at sort of a bird's eye view, you effectively have the compliance markets, which is mostly made up of EU ETS. And then you have the VCM, so voluntary carbon market, which is what we're talking about today with permanent CDR, which fits within VCM. But just again, to zoom out, the compliance market is close to $1 trillion in value. So EU ETS, I believe, is last year was sort of the market cap or the market size was around 850 billion. There's a couple other compliance markets. So let's just say $1 trillion, just as a ballpark number, is approaching that figure quite quickly. The voluntary carbon market, which permanent CDR is a part of, was around 2 billion last year, right? So quite a small fraction of the compliance activity. And then within VCM, within the voluntary carbon market, you have all of the different removal and avoided emissions credits and projects, et cetera. And so if you actually take a look at permanent CDR, we're talking at yet a smaller fraction of that 2 billion. I believe some of the figures that were put out for last year of purchases, so not delivery, we're talking on the order of 200 million. So you can kind of see the scale, right? 1 trillion, 2 billion, 200 million of purchases, and deliveries are actually even less than that. So on one hand, there's a ton of activity, and it's fantastic to see the growth. On the other, there's quite a ways to go. And this kind of supports our activity on the demand side. And it's part of what we talk about with companies, is to say, there's a ton of work to do here. We need to act fast. Time is certainly not our friend with this challenge and what we need to do. And so we really need to ramp up that 200 million in purchases and get that going. All of that with just one caveat, that it is really important to note that reduction strategies are absolutely crucial, and removal does not replace reduction strategies, right? This is a very key point, an important point. So anyway, I sort of digress a bit there, but so that's kind of just market information, bird's eye view. And if we dive a little bit more into permanent CDR, one sort of key, perhaps it's not a trend, but just something that's part of the market that I think is really key to keep it to pay attention to, is everything around certification and MRV. And I'm not going to dive too much into that because I know Carbon Future is going to come up, and so they're doing amazing work there, and I'll let them really dive into that a bit further. But within this whole world of certification and MRV, there's definitely a developing ecosystem with different players. Right now, it's my understanding is that biochar, as one of the main CDR activities that is sort of at the very least partially covered, if not well covered, by sort of methodology review and different frameworks. It seems that what's coming up next is enhanced weathering as a pathway that will be covered by some of this work as well. And again, I imagine Nicholas from Carbon Future will speak to this in a bit more detail. There are other parties that are in this ecosystem as well, different auditors. Of course, there's the government side of things that's stepping in, the EU Commission with their framework that they announced back in November, or at least the first steps to announce that framework. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of things to pay attention to. I think it'll be quite interesting to sort of see how the ecosystem breaks down, because as I said, there's sort of certification aspect to this. There's a methodology review aspect to this. There's the actual MRV and life cycle assessments coming from the project themselves. And of course, there's also the whole side of registries, right, of logging this activity and the removal activity. And so how do we point to sources of truth for this removal activity? So all of those parts will be quite interesting to make out as the space develops. And then the last thing on the supply side that I think is quite important, and this is really at the core of our work at CarbonX, is really around financing and pricing. And so what we're seeing is that project financing is still quite difficult and definitely a challenge. A huge part of that is just that a lot of projects are in the pilot stage or lab stage. So internally, we track sort of 4 different stages. We have lab stage, pilot stage, demo stage, and commercialization stage. And if you think about the 106 or so projects that we're looking at, more than half are in the first 2 stages. So we're talking about pretty early stage activity and projects. And what that means is that they're not really bankable, right? It's difficult for those projects to go and get project financing. So the main vehicle for them at this point remains really equity financing, so raising money from VCs, et cetera, or through activity like ours, get some type of prepayment to fund some of these activities from the corporate sector, and then potentially using different vehicles to then also receive payment at delivery of the carbon credits. So project financing is tricky. Having said that, I think we're seeing more and more maturity around deal terms. As I mentioned, this ratio of prepayment versus long-term offtake and payment at delivery is quite interesting and a very nice vehicle to de-risk some of these purchases, as well as help some of the projects get off the ground quickly and get some operations going. And I think the main reason for this ratio is also that it provides flexibility around pricing. So that's quite important. Of course, prepayment is a bit riskier, so it'll be a bit cheaper on the credit, right? But then you can also play with timing and vintage years to sort of gain flexibility on the price. And just to close this point out, I think as of recent, there's a big discussion in the ecosystem about this with the price in the compliance market of a ton of carbon on the EU ETS, which recently crossed €100 per ton for the first time ever. And so that's going to be a very interesting development to keep track of, just because I think in many ways it normalizes and perhaps makes the buying sector a bit more comfortable with higher price credit prices. So, if a carbon credit is $200, $300 coming from a permanent CDR project, and the carbon credit on EU ETS, or I should say credit allowance, is at 100, then all of a sudden the pricing is becoming a bit more efficient, and so it may normalize some of these higher prices. So I think jury is still out in terms of the impact of that, but I think over the next year or two we'll sort of see what kind of impact that $100 or €100, I should say, threshold on EU ETS has had on permanent CDR activity and pricing. Next slide, please. The second big category that I wanted to go over, so let's shift over from supply to demand. And I really would love to focus on one big trend that we're seeing here, which I think has just a lot of important impact and consequences, mostly good, so that's good news, is really this shift from, and it's not all companies, so I should specify, but we're starting to see the conversation shifting from purely offsetting strategies to more of a climate impact strategy. And so what that means is, a buyer may have come, recently may have come to this problem by saying, okay, I calculated my footprint, I have 500 tons, or I have 1,000 tons, or I have 10,000 tons to offset. And so they would really look at it as, what is the most amount of carbon credit, or in other words, how can I offset that footprint with the lowest amount of money? And now I think that conversation is shifting to, how do I leverage the most out of each dollar or each euro or whatever currency you want to use spent to maximize climate impact while also offsetting as much of my footprint as possible. And so it's a very different framework to look at the same challenge through, and it actually opens the door for quite a lot of good. It's I think a more complicated framework because it really is a more holistic framework to look through the challenge at, and also it's more difficult in that it becomes a multifarious spend, right? Whereas before it's like, okay, how do I offset 1,000 tons? Now it's like, how do I offset, but also think about co-benefits? How do I think about geographical implications? How do I think about local community development and environmental justice? Perhaps how do I match my emission hotspots that are across the world with local projects that are right there next to the emission hotspots? So it's much more involved. However, we think it's a more comprehensive way of looking at the problem, and we believe that the net result of that approach is one that is more positive than simply looking at it as an offsetting exercise. So I would say that's probably the main trend we're seeing on the demand side, and hopefully with our work and all the other people and companies and great entities doing work on the demand side as well, is how do we generate more and more demand, bring more funds to the permanent CDR space, and accelerate these technologies. Oh, and one last point before I move on to the last slide is the rise of the insurance space. I think this is going to be really interesting. There's a couple of awesome companies doing work there to basically insure risks such as non-delivery risks of the removal or the credits. I think that that space will evolve quite quickly. And again, we'll just remove some of the friction from some of these deals. And so hopefully it kind of is yet another tool we can use to open up the demand door, so to speak. And then if we could go to the last slide, I'd love to spend just a bit of time on standards and regulations. So really enveloping the supply and demand sides. I think a good way to think about it is standards and regulations. A lot of activity here. It's great to see, honestly. We're based in Paris, as I was mentioned before, so the EU Commission and the EU is quite active in the space. Of course, the passing of the IRA in the US made a lot of noise, but given our location, I'm going to spend more time talking about the EU and what's happening here. So the first thing is EU CRSF, which was announced back in November. This was the EU Commission's proposal for a framework defining different carbon removal qualities and standards and projects. It was quite broad, but I think the idea was just to start the discussion and then dive into the details throughout this year and following next year. And actually, the EU Commission just held its first expert group, which was the first step of their proposal to really start diving into the details. I think something that's quite key to this proposal and something to look out for, and it's kind of buried in the text if you look at their proposal, is really this idea of a credit expiry date. So if you think about different quality levels of projects and removal activity, time is actually a great way to define quality. It sounds a bit abstract, but because ultimately we're really talking about how much time is the carbon removed for and therefore stored for. And so quality can be derived from time. And so the idea of a credit expiry date is quite interesting because I think it will sort of inherently define the quality of the credit and of the project behind that credit. The other sort of big EU initiative is CRSD, EU CRSD, and that actually touches on reporting specifications for companies and just rules on how to report on sustainability. This is going to be quite impactful, and actually the EU has come out and said that this will probably impact close to 50,000 companies in the EU. And really, I'm not going to dive too much into detail about the CSRD, but CRSD, sorry, but really it specifies how the information should be published. For instance, it needs to be digital, how it needs to be structured, what needs to be included in there. And so I think our hope is that this will lead to even more data transparency, even more discussion, which is great. And the last point, and then I'll hand it off, is about a decree that was passed, and this is France-specific legislation. But again, could be quite impactful. We've already heard of companies changing their offsetting and contribution strategies based on this decree. This is called Decree 539, and it's being enforced as of January 1st of this year. And so, put simply, and I highly recommend that everybody goes out and like Googles it and reads the whole thing. You can like Google Translate. I don't know, ask ChatGPT to translate it, but it's called Decree 539. And really what it does is it lists a number of terms such as carbon neutral, zero carbon, neutral carbon footprint, climate neutral, things like this, net zero, things like this, that companies can only use these terms in marketing and communication and product packaging and in describing their services if they abide by the decree's specifications. And some of these specifications includes things like putting forth a reduction strategy for the next 10 years, and that has to be renewed every 5 years. And then within that, there's a bunch of other bullet points that are quite interesting, such as disclosing the price of the credits that they've purchased as part of their compensation or offsetting strategies. So it goes quite in depth. And again, the implications are that it really changes the way of how companies go about their strategies, and then in turn, how they communicate around this. And so this is France specific, but I imagine we'll see more and more of this kind of thing across not only other countries, but across continents potentially. And again, just something really key to keep track of, because I think the intent is good. Ultimately, it's to hold companies accountable and make sure that the activity behind what's being said is true and being accounted for. So with that, I thank you again for your time, and looking forward to the Q&A later. And I'll hand it off to, I believe Nicholas is going next. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel, for enlightening us with so thoughtful thoughts on it. I would now like to invite Mr. Nicholas for sharing his views further on the webinar topic. And I would just request a friendly request that we can think of time a little and keep it little in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neha. Thank you, Ariane, for inviting me, and thanks for BIS Research to organize that. My name is Nicholas, and I work for Carbon Future. And in my presentation, I would like to explain to you what Carbon Future is doing. Firstly, what our idea is and where. Then secondly, we are in this carbon removal market. So the next slide, please. I mean, the bigger picture, I think I don't need to explain. We have strange weather here in Europe, a little snow, very warm, and thunderstorms, which normally come up in May. The global warming goal to limit this at 1.5 degrees at the maximum is our driver. And the challenge is, as already pointed out earlier, that we need, on the one hand, to reduce the emissions, but on the other hand, there are residual emissions, and these need to be taken out of the atmosphere, and therefore the carbon removals are needed. Next slide, please. So besides the policy attempts, which were just before mentioned by Axel, there have not been so many actions on the policy side with regards to carbon removal. So what we have seen are, of course, now these, for instance, EU frameworks which are coming up, which is great, but till date, only the private sector has been active. And here we see, on the other hand, big ambition and lots of buy-in from private sector to move into the removal space. We are here in the voluntary carbon market, so this is voluntary action, and companies are investing into that topic today. Next slide, please. Yeah, what do we do? We, as a pioneer in this market, would like to help the private sector companies for now. With a very robust framework. And on the other hand, of course, our tools and what we develop will be in future also relevant for the compliance markets then. Next slide. Maybe taking one step back and again talking about what we need to do. And this is now maybe true for the entire ecosystem, but also for the companies being active in the voluntary carbon market. So as said, we need to remove or reduce the emissions which we currently have to a very minimum. This means that any emission which can be avoided should be avoided, and then we have the measure of carbon removal, which would then here in green under this line be used to balance out the emissions and to reach net zero 2050 at the latest, or to even get climate positive on a company level. And this is a requirement already been laid out, for instance, by Science Based Targets Initiative, which is a framework helping companies to define a target path towards net zero. And they say that, of course, the remaining emissions need to be balanced with carbon removal. And next slide, please. The reason for that is, and this is maybe something which is relevant for this entire voluntary carbon market, is that avoidance credits, so these CO2 certificates, which are mostly traded today, on the left side of this graph, they cannot actually come up for this goal, because if you purchase an avoidance credit which finances some avoidance measure elsewhere, you still at your factory or facility will emit the 1 ton of CO2, and like this we will never reach any net zero goal, which is needed for the achievement of 1.5 degree target. Whereby on the right hand side you see now what happens if you compensate 1 ton of CO2 emitted with 1 ton of CO2 removed. Only like this you can achieve net zero. And this is actually what we are focusing on and what carbon removal is about. The next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. So there is now a principal issue with these carbon removals. So carbon removal credits are a service. If you as a buyer, as a company, purchase a carbon removal credit, then you purchase a service, and to this service there is a certain promise connected. And the promise is that with this certificate, you ensured that a certain amount of CO2 is taken out of the atmosphere and not released again. So if you compare this now with our garbage, for instance, you pay for the garbage, and now we of course need to ensure that in 10 years, not half of the garbage is coming back in front of your house. So in other words, we need to ensure that this removal is really permanent, but also that we know where the removal is, how it has been taken place, what has been done, and that it is really permanent. And for this, we need a robust system which allows for good monitoring, reporting, and verification. Next slide. This whole issue about the transparency, about the trust in this removal economy was not there or is not there yet. So because of this issue that we need to prove that the removal is actually durable and permanent, there need to be solutions out there which actually bring this trust, which improve this trust to the removal market. And if you look back in history of carbon removal, so carbon capture and storage has already been discussed by the United Nations framework of climate change in 2007. And there always the story was, yeah, we cannot actually issue credits for removal because it's completely unclear how can we make sure that the carbon is actually staying to be taken out of the atmosphere. And now we have the tools and the measures to prove this and to document this, and this will actually bring the trustworthiness to the carbon removal market. Next slide, please. Now, we as Carbon Future, we focus only on permanent removal methods for the moment. So we heard about emissions avoidance. These are credits or measures which actually need to be done anyway. So actually crediting here and selling or purchasing of carbon credits doesn't really make sense. We also do not look so much on the non-permanent removals like soil organic carbon increase or afforestation, reforestation, because these are measures which can be reversed. So if you look at the forest, if you plant a tree, this is a great measure. This is something we need to definitely do. We need to increase the forest area, but we should not issue credits for that, which are used to compensate for emissions, CO2 emissions, which are in our atmosphere for a very long time. To compensate for these emissions, we should use permanent removal measures like, for instance, the production and carbon preserving application of biochar, measures like enhanced weathering, CO2 storage in recycled concrete, and also measures which are yet not scalable like direct air capture or deep ocean sequestration. Carbon Future for the moment looks at scalable solutions like the ones which go into the area, for instance, biochar and enhanced weathering. Next slide, please. So why biochar as our biggest vertical? So biochar is for us a sweet spot currently because it's combining different sustainable development effects with carbon removal. So if you produce biochar and if you apply it, for instance, in agriculture, there are various positive side effects next to the carbon removal. So it increases soil fertility, it reduces that nitrogen is washed out and going into the aquifers and so on and so forth. So that's currently for us a big topic. And the good thing with biochar is that it is really scalable. It can be done worldwide. It can be done by a farmer, smallholder farmer in Kenya, as well as by a big industrial facility in Denmark. Next slide. And where does now Carbon Future stand in this market? We see ourselves in between the suppliers of carbon removal, so for instance, the biochar producers, and on the other hand, the companies with a claim towards net zero. So what we do is we provide actually a tracking system, and through this tracking system, we know where the removal actually is, how it has occurred. And we work together with standards like Carbon Standards International, but also Vera VCS and others to issue carbon credits, which then can be purchased by companies with a claim or with a target path towards net zero. The next slide, please. This very complex picture shows in principle where our services are. So in green, you see what Carbon Future is doing. So as I said, we are connecting in principle the supplier with the buyer of certificates. We work together in blue with standard setting bodies, which actually lay out a certain methodology, how to calculate the carbon removal which was achieved. Carbon credits are issued in a registry, which is normally hosted by the standard, and can then be traded. And we on our platform provide all the information which is relevant for the different parties to work on the issuance of the carbon credit. So we have information from the supplier about the project, which then needs to be verified and validated before the carbon credit can be issued. And all of this is summarized on our platform, and through that we create a level of transparency and of trustworthiness, which is much bigger than what you have seen in the past about carbon credits. And we really want to or need to avoid that any types of cheating or issuance of carbon credits which have not been achieved is possible. And with this digital solution, we will try to achieve that. Next slide, please. If you look now on our platform, and this is now very small and I unfortunately cannot zoom in, but just to explain you in brief words what we do. So we track actually packaging units of, for instance, biochar or rock powder with a unique identifier through the chain of custody. So we have a producer, so for instance, the operator of a biochar facility who actually issues packaging units of biochar, which then are, and this is in this blue box, changing the ownership. If you sell it to a trader, for instance, and the trader then sells it on to a farmer, and the farmer then in the end applies the biochar in a carbon preserving way, which means that he, for instance, feeds the biochar to his cow, or he applies the biochar on soil. And then once this chain of custody has been walked through, a CF coupon will be issued, which is kind of a summary of all the data behind this packaging unit. And based on this, only if all the criteria are met, a carbon credit can actually be issued in green. The next slide, please. Now, once the carbon credit is issued, this does not happen on our platform. As said, this does happen on a third-party registry to ensure that parties are independent of each other and to maintain the independency of the parties, and also align or disalign actually the interest, so that one party is not incentivized to cheat here. So we currently have a direct connection in a digital way to the Registry of Carbon Standards International, but also we are working with other registries and standards to directly implement this and connect this. The next slide, please. And the next one, this is just a nice picture. Now to tell you what type of projects we have. So as said, we are working with projects on industrial scale. So these are, for instance, pyrolysis facilities which produce several thousand tons of biochar per year, or also projects which apply enhanced rock weathering, but we also have projects which work with smallholder communities in developing countries. So there's a big variety, and all these projects, of course, follow certain methodologies which are developed by third-party standards. Yeah, and with the next slide, I think I'm at the end of my presentation. This is a little bit our scaling path. So last year, we already issued 20,000 tons, and we are looking at around 100,000 tons of CO2 being removed from the atmosphere today. But our growth path is steep, and we want to achieve the megatons in 2024. Yeah, with this, I thank you very much. As there are still two more slides, one with our clients and one with my contact data and some information about our company. But for the sake of time, I think I stop here and hand back to Arjan and Neha to take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas, for giving us so deep insight about the carbon future. Now, I would like to invite Pooja to summarize and give us a more detailed insight on carbon future. Thanks.
Thank you, Neha. Firstly, thank you, Axel, Nicholas, and Aryan for throwing light on buzzing topic in present and coming era of carbon management, that is CDR, which was very insightful. To sum up, I believe to achieve net zero targets, carbon removal is basically non-optional, and for this, we need a whole lot of portfolio of carbon removal options. As Aryan rightly said, to attain this, we can either adopt nature-based approaches like planting trees or restoring forests, which has been deployed these days very frequently. But what if plant dies or dries up or burns up in the fire? The carbon can go right back to the atmosphere. So these solutions are likely to be shorter lived than approaches that the technology-based approaches that just we have discussed in the webinar, like DAC, biochar, or for example, hybrid nature of nature-based and technology-based approach like BECCS, biochar, bioenergy carbon capture storage, or ocean-based approach that Aryan just mentioned about, adding minerals to the to increase the alkalinity of seawater. That's carbon mineralization. So all of these technologies, I believe, is expected to emerge as main technology that could promote CDR in future. However, I feel, achieving high levels of carbon removal is going to take a lot of research and development on terms to determine the most effective methods, which can be utilized in the longer run. Neha, next slide, please. As you can see on the slide, we have built up quite expertise and knowledge in this domain. As you can see on the screen, a lot of our research studies have been focused on green technologies and sustainability. As you can see on the left side of this slide, we have recently published some of the reports on the same domain, relevant titles like CCUS or CDR market, that's carbon dioxide removal market, green hydrogen market, green ammonia market. And we have also on the right side, as you can see, we have some of our upcoming reports that are already in publishing phase, like carbon smart ethanol, green steel market, or recyclable thermoset. So these are some of the relevant titles that we have been, working on, and we are publishing these reports, and we have published these reports by BIS. Next slide, Neha. Talking about Insight Mong, the whole concept of designing or coming up with this Insight Mong is to, share the knowledge that industry experts basically have. So at BIS, to successfully conduct these niche reports, we, heavily rely on our AI-based platform, which we call it as Insight Mong or Deep Technology Knowledge Platform. The web platform, if you see, it's beautifully and extensively designed, depicting three major segments that I would like to highlight in this conversation. Firstly, it's the industry experts, where we have tried to integrate, market experts from different regions or different domains or different industries, wherein they try to come on the same web platform and they can network with each other. Another section which is quite interesting is and insightful is the industry report section. Like, we have tried to collate a maximum reports from the reliable sources, and we have tried to categorize them under the different verticals like space tech or agriculture, mobility, or healthcare, for that matter, or chemicals. Another section is a detailed Q&A section, wherein you can actually start your own questionnaire part of it. Like, you can initiate the conversation, you can get engaged on the existing discussion, you can post your questions, answer those questions, and which is absolutely free of cost. So once you register on this portal, I think sales colleague will reach out to you for the next processes for the same. Over to you, Neha. Thank you.
So with this thought, let me conclude today's session. And now I declare the forum open for any questions from the listeners. I request the listeners to kindly type in the questions, and I will be happy to pass the question to the esteemed speakers. While in the process of the webinar, I have received few of the questions. I would like Mr. Excel to answer. How would you split the project financing in percentage of financing type, in like how much debt or how much equity? Do you think the project are only equity financed, and are after how many years would project developers be able to bring in debt? And is there a large difference in the financing split between the project types?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a very good question, and the short answer is it depends. But actually, so as CarbonX, we're not going to get involved in equity or debt financing in any way. So the equity financing is really going to be on the investor side, so the traditional kind of VC or perhaps other parties. And on the debt side, that was sort of the point that I was making. Maybe I wasn't as eloquent as I should have been, but that financing is actually quite difficult. A lot of these projects are not bankable today, so it's difficult to use debt as an instrument. And so really what's remaining is the first part, the equity financing, which we're not going to get involved in. What we are going to get involved in is try to bring the corporate sector into the mix, and really take corporate funds to not only deploy those funds to compensate for or offset tons, but as I mentioned, really deploy those funds through a climate strategy to maximize climate impact for that corporate client. And then in terms of, if you want to sort of maybe use the same question, but ask it about that, if let's say there's $1 million budget from a corporate client, what is going to be the split of that $1 million budget across prepayments or long-term offtake, that's really just like it really depends. It depends on the strategy on the corporate side. It depends on the types of projects they'd like to invest in. Depending on the pathway that you're utilizing, you're going to have different splits of prepayment versus long-term offtake, depending on how nascent the technology is, et cetera. So it really depends. There isn't kind of just like a 50-50, 80-20. It really spans the gamut.
Okay, thank you, Axel. There was an additional question to this query. It says that, do you have any example of companies involving in the insurance space, and what other types of insurance might they focus on besides non-delivery risk of the carbon credits?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can think of two companies. There's probably more. The two are KITA, K-I-T-A, and the other one is OKA, O-K-A. I don't know what's up with the A ending. I don't know if they're all named this way. I don't think so, but those are the two. And in terms of other insurance, in addition to, and they're doing great. I know a lot more about KITA. They're awesome. I don't know too much about OKA. And in terms of other insurance, yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of start really thinking about like company level insurances in addition to project level insurances or credit level insurances. I think right now the only thing that I've really heard about is kind of around just non-delivery risk, but I'm sure more and more products are going to be coming out that insure kind of the whole chain or the whole stack, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Axel. So the next question is focused to you, Axel and Nicholas, both of you. Have either of you started looking at hydrogen production pathways that use biomethane, renewable gas as feedstock, and then split it into hydrogen and solid carbon? We are doing this at High Rock and view it as a clear and achievable route to negative carbon emission. Would you be keen to, can you please throw your perspective on the same?
You're happy to take this one. I think if we can produce carbon, like solid carbon as a result of that, and the project emissions, so the balance is carbon negative, then the removal can be credited. I would think that this is a project where there is currently no methodology available to issue carbon credits today, but we would encourage you to apply for our Catalyst program, with which we could support you in selecting a standard, developing a methodology, and even maybe issue some experimental carbon credits from that.
Thank you, Nicholas. So, Axel, if you can answer this one, what are the main constraints to be unlocked for the growth of VCM supply chain or regulation for CarbonX?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? I don't think I
What would be the main constraint to unlocking the growth of VCM supply or regulations for CarbonX?
I don't know if I fully understand the question. Is it about regulation, like government regulation, or?
Yes, it's about supply or regulations. Any one you want to answer?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think from the regulation side of things, I think everybody's kind of waiting for some definitions. So definitions of kind of, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of time, and which will kind of inherently define quality. And then I think on the supply side, I mean, I think everyone's really busy on the supply side. The projects are trying to raise money, trying to sell directly to raise funds for the credits and really accelerate their operations. So I think what we can do on our end as CarbonX is really unlock the demand side to accelerate that. And so that's where we're focused. Most of our focus is going is really speaking with the corporate sector to help them bring them closer to these projects and permanent removal to kind of unlock these operations and help them accelerate.
Okay, thank you. The next question would be for Nicholas. Is the method of production for biochar grounded rock, which is energy intensive, taken into account when calculating how much carbon has been permanently sequestrated?
Simple answer, yes, of course. And this is regulated by the standard and methodology of the, which issues the credits. So any project emissions need to be taken account if you want to issue a credit.
So maybe the last question for today. Most offsetting techniques used to achieve carbon neutrality are now considered as greenwashing and cannot achieve net zero. What would be the scale of growth of the CDR market is the question. Would anyone like to volunteer for the same?
I can say what my opinion is. Yes, the CDR market needs to scale rapidly. I mean, if we take the 1.5 degrees Celsius target serious, then we need to just reduce emissions as much as we can and scale the CDR market. That's what we need to do.
Thank you, Nicholas, for all the answers. Thank you, Axel. I would like to thank all the esteemed speakers for today. And thank you for being the part of the webinar. I hope all the questions which remain unanswered will be answered to the blog post or via mail to the questionnaires. And thank you for attending. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. Thank you, Nicholas.